Greetings, my dear wizards, witches, muggles, and squibs. Here we are with a brand new special episode of the Spellbook Chronicles, where we delve into a longer and more detailed story dedicated to one of the oldest, most powerful, and complex families in the wizarding world, the Black family. I was just doing a bit of revision. Last night at Hog's Head Inn, things were quite explosive. But I don't need to revise, because I am Quentin Pendragon, and ancient history is my business. The Blacks are synonymous with tradition, prestige, and unfortunately dark magic. But behind their motto, Toujours Pour, lies a history of rebellion and family tragedies. Sirius and Regulus, but also Bellatrix, Andromeda, and Narcissa, as well as Phineas Nigellus Black, perhaps one of the most hated headmasters Hogwarts has ever known. Which member of this prestigious family is your favorite? Let me know in the comments. I'm dying to know. So, popcorn and butterbeer are ready. Let's begin.
Long before ministry decrees and wizarding statutes, when Britain was a tangle of fiefdoms and forgotten woods, a name began to whisper through the trees, half in reverence, half in fear. Black. Their precise origins remain contested. Some scholars trace them to medieval France, alongside families like the Malfoys and Lestranges, settling in Britain after the Norman conquest. A record in the Bibliothèque Magique de Paris notes a branch, the Noirs, expelled from the rolls in 1234 after hosting a lavish banquet to celebrate their blood purity, inviting every pure-blood family in the realm. Yet the feast concealed a cruel curse. Any guest whose blood was deemed impure would lose the right to speak forever. The curse sparked outrage, shattering the delicate balance within the French magical nobility, then carefully maintained between pure bloods and those of non-magical descent, alongside the sway of the non-magical aristocracy. According to this theory, the Noirs were swiftly condemned for their ruthless use of magic, their name forever stained, forcing the family into exile. The Blacks, however, dismiss any foreign ancestry, claiming a bloodline as British as Hogwarts itself. By the late Middle Ages, the family had forged a distinct identity, while others, like the Malfoys, sought favor in Muggle courts. The Blacks turned inward, rooted in older, darker ideals. They drew from Irish bloodlines, from Salazar Slytherin, and from the doctrines of the Gaunts. To them, Muggles were not simply lesser, they were corrosive. They shunned diplomacy, resisted integration, and held tradition above all. Their purism, never codified, yet deeply embedded, governed marriage, inheritance, and belief. Which brings us to Grimmauld Place. The origins of the London residence remain obscured by enchantments and misdirection, yet early 18th century maps speak of an estate hidden in what is now Islington. Built in secret, perhaps, cloaked from both Muggles and ministry. Following the Statute of Secrecy in 1689, most wizarding families retreated to rural enclaves. The Blacks did not. Out of pride or defiance, they stayed. And so, over time, Muggle London rose around them. For centuries, Britain's most purest wizarding family found themselves, ironically, at the heart of a Muggle borough. Some called it poetic, others tragic. But the Blacks, if they ever resented it, kept their silence. Across the centuries, the Black family produced countless notable figures: ministers, duelists, potion masters, and others whose names are better left unspoken. Yet few were as enigmatic or as unsettling as Apollonia Black. A Slytherin, attended Hogwarts towards the late 18th century. In those years, Richard Jackdaw, a reckless and infatuated student, sought to win her favor with a peculiar gift: pages torn from a book stolen from the mischievous Peeves the Poltergeist. Yet Apollonia found neither the gift nor the giver worthy, dismissing his courtship with cold indifference.
Pathetic.
When Jackdaw met a grim fate, decapitated under mysterious circumstances, Apollonia's testimony condemned Anne Thisbe, Jackdaw's secret lover, and a Muggle-born witch. Motivated perhaps by jealousy or bitter disdain for Anne's heritage, Apollonia leveraged the Black family's influence at the Ministry of Magic to seal Anne's fate. She was sent to Azkaban, where she remained imprisoned until 1890, an injustice still remembered today. However, if any Black embodied the family's pride and prejudice, it was Phineas Nigellus, a sharp-tongued Slytherin from the late 1850s. He rose to become Hogwarts headmaster, though few liked him. Known more for his ambition and disdain for authority than kindness, Phineas was infamous for cancelling Quidditch and ignoring bullying. He cared little for students, more for status and legacy. When dark times came in 1891, as the Goblin Uprising led by the Dark Ranrock loomed, he turned a deaf ear, avoiding getting his hands dirty with troubles beyond his concern. Yet few remember that the following year, it was under his headship that a young Albus Dumbledore first set foot in the place that would one day become his home. Even in death, Phineas Nigellus Black's portrait remains, a sharp-tongued presence, offering blunt counsel both at Hogwarts, among the portraits of his successors, and within the ancestral Black family home. Born into a lineage steeped in rigid traditions and dark prejudices, one figure dared to break the mold. Rejecting his family's fading legacy, he faced the shadows, within and beyond, with unwavering resolve. Championing freedom over conformity, he risked all to protect those he loved and forge a new path. This is the story of Sirius Black III, the last rebellious heir. As you will have gathered by now, few names carry such cold weight as the House of Black. An ancient dynasty, their bloodline claimed unbroken since the Middle Ages. Pure, powerful, untouchable. To the Blacks, purity wasn't just tradition, it was law. A legacy carved deep into their bones, whispered with each new birth. Toujours pur, always pure. Among pure-blood families, they were royalty, proud and unyielding. Untainted by Muggle blood, they stood above all others. But behind the grandeur of their manor walls, behind the silken tapestries and formal grace, lay a darker truth. By the 20th century, the Blacks, like many noble lines, had learned to rewrite their own history, erasing Muggleborns, squibs, and anyone who dared dilute their blood. Names vanished, faces were forgotten. Blood was cleansed from the family tree with ruthless precision. Their obsession with purity twisted love and reason. Cousins married cousins, binding blood like a sacred flame, one that could never be diluted, no matter the cost. Orion and Walburga Black were no exception, bound not by passion, but by pedigree, a union as cold and precise as the creed they upheld. Orion Black was born in 1929, the only son of Arcturus Black and Melania Macmillan, heir to a long and venerable bloodline. His childhood was steeped in the silent pride of old money and older traditions, raised beneath the stern portraits of ancestors whose eyes still judged from beyond the grave. At Hogwarts, he was sorted, as expected, into Slytherin House, the cradle of ambition and legacy. There, he honed not only his magic, but the quiet arrogance instilled in him since birth, the belief that the world belonged to those of the right blood, and that the old ways had been forgotten by too many, too quickly. In his youth, Orion, like many of his relatives, quietly supported the ideology of Gellert Grindelwald, whose meteoric rise during the 1930s ignited hope among purist families across Europe. Though the House of Black never pledged allegiance, many regarded his crusade with reverent fascination, believing he might be the visionary the wizarding world needed, someone capable of restoring order and reaffirming the cosmic hierarchy between Muggles and wizards. But in 1945, Grindelwald fell, and with the end of the global wizarding war, the dream of restoring the magical world to its former glory crumbled, scattered into the hush of the wind, a hush that had not yet spoken its final word. It was around this time that Walburga Black, born 4 years before Orion, emerged as his destined match. A devout traditionalist from her youth, she was the daughter of Pollux Black and Irma Crab, and a proud descendant of a line that viewed itself as the pinnacle of wizarding civilization. Like her brothers, Cygnus and Alphard, she was sorted into Slytherin, where she thrived in an atmosphere of superiority and tradition. But unlike many of her peers, still haunted by Grindelwald's legacy and growing more open to tolerance, Walburga remained unshaken. To her, the preservation of blood purity was not opinion. It was sacred. She had always known her future. Walburga did not dream of romance or rebellion. She dreamt of preservation, of continuing the Black name, intact and eternal. She waited patiently for Orion to complete his education, their engagement understood, if never announced. Their marriage, sometime in the 1950s, was less a union of souls than a ritualistic binding of bloodlines, an act of duty cloaked in the language of tradition. Together, they assumed their rightful place as patron and matron of the noble and most ancient House of Black. Their residence, number 12 Grimold Place, stood not merely as a home, but as a monument, austere, imposing, saturated in enchantments and legacy. Hidden within an ordinary street in Islington, the house remained concealed from unworthy eyes, protected by spells of immense power. Within those grand yet stifling walls, the next chapter of the Black lineage began, beneath stars that had guided their family for generations. For the House of Black did not name its children lightly. Across centuries, its sons and daughters had borne the names of stars and constellations, celestial bodies thought to reflect the purity and permanence of their bloodline. Each name was both symbol and prophecy, binding the child not only to the heavens, but to the heavy weight of legacy. And so, on the 3rd of November 1959, their firstborn was named Sirius, after the brightest star in the night sky.
Did you know that exclusive Spellbook Chronicles booklets are now available? Ancient volumes filled with secrets just like the ones hidden in the restricted section. But instead of hiding from Madame Pince, all you need is a click. This Muggle technology is amazing. Each booklet contains one of the most beloved stories from the series, enriched with exclusive images. So, what are you waiting for? Start collecting them all. Your support is invaluable. Not only will you enjoy the magic, but you'll also be supporting the channel, allowing us to keep bringing you the most amazing stories, like the one in this episode. So, enjoy the show.
You will carry the name.
From the moment he was born,
Sirius.
Sirius Black was destined to be the heir of his house.
You are the heir.
Before he could even read, lessons on blood purity and magical supremacy filled his days.
Come.
Under the stern gaze of his mother, Walburga, and the icy silence of his father, Orion, Sirius was introduced not just to the magic they prized, but to its darkest corners. Dark magic wasn't feared in the Black household. It was studied, dissected, mastered.
Remember, Sirius.
To them, true power meant knowing every shadow the Ministry warned against. Only the weak feared power. Only the blind obeyed. But Sirius carried a storm in his bones, something wild that didn't belong in the polished parlor or the family tapestry. As a child, he slipped past wards and Creature, the surly house elf, to vanish into the streets of Muggle London. Not out of rebellion yet, but curiosity. The rattle of buses, the hum of traffic, the neon lights, the strange magic of cinema. It was loud, messy, alive. Unlike the stillness of Grimold Place, the Muggle world moved. He spent hours watching people who didn't know his name and wouldn't care if they did. Motorcycles, headlights, posters of actors with smiles like freedom. It was a different kind of magic. Only one family member knew. His cousin Andromeda, a few years older, sharp-tongued and burning with the same quiet defiance. She didn't judge him. She shared it. At dinners, they traded smirks, passed notes, whispered of other lives, other names, other futures. They didn't belong, and for a time, they didn't need to. They had each other. But where Andromeda was a question, her sister Bellatrix was a sentence. Her loyalty to the family creed was absolute. She was proud, merciless, and entirely committed to the doctrine of purity. Where Andromeda entertained dreams, Bellatrix enforced discipline.
You two.
She watched them,
End it.
always. She told.
Andromeda.
She reminded them,
Inside.
loudly, coldly,
Now.
of what the Blacks
You're
were
of the House of Black.
and what they were not.
Act like it.
Seasons passed. When Andromeda left for Hogwarts, Sirius waited for summer with a strange ache. And so, it was Regulus who stepped into the quiet. 2 years younger, his little brother had once trailed Sirius's every step, eyes wide with adoration, copying his movements, repeating his words, hanging on every tale. He had been earnest, bright, eager to please. But the House of Black had no use for innocence. Regulus changed. He stopped asking questions, stopped sneaking into Sirius's room at night. He learned to mimic their parents, precise, graceful, cold.
Creature.
The son the house could be proud of. The boy destined to sit at the head of the table and call it destiny. Sirius was something else, a force of nature. His magic was wild, raw, unsettling. Even among the proud Blacks, his power stood out. No one's seen talent like that since Bellatrix, someone whispered once. Sirius heard. He always did. Not for praise, but for proof. Proof that he was more than their chains. Regulus became his mother's pride, Sirius her shame. The stray dog at the feast's edge, teeth bared, defiant. While Creature muttered and Walburga shrieked, Sirius grinned, that crooked, infuriating grin. Their fury didn't scare him, it amused him. Their obsession with control made them small. Small could never be great, and greatness would never own him. But everything was about to change. Hogwarts, distant, whispered, was no longer far away. It was the 1st of September, 1971, and when the Sorting Hat touched his head, it shouted a word no Black had worn in centuries. Gryffindor! Gasps echoed through the Great Hall. Somewhere, a goblet dropped. Sirius stood, stiff-backed, and walked to the Gryffindor table without flinching. He didn't look at the Slytherin table. He didn't need to. The stares of his family burned hotter than any curse.
Gryffindor.
To them, it wasn't just a disgrace.
Traitor.
It was betrayal. Confirmation of everything they feared he might become. But Sirius didn't care. Because at the Gryffindor table, among the sea of unfamiliar faces, he spotted one that made him grin. A boy with wind-swept black hair, glasses askew, and an irreverent gleam in his eye. James Potter. They'd met on the train, sharing a compartment and a contraband stash of cauldron cakes. Within minutes, they'd been laughing like old friends, mocking the prefects and speculating loudly about which rules were most fun to break. The bond had been instant, effortless, two sparks finding each other in a forest full of dry kindling. James, it turned out, came from a well-off wizarding family who had made their fortune thanks to the Sleekeazy's hair potion and scalp treatment.
Welcome.
Which was rather poetic, really, given that James's own hair was perhaps the most stubborn, rebellious thing about him. Apparently, some problems run in the blood, and others inspire an entire product line. If Sirius's family was scandalized, they weren't quiet about it. Letters arrived thick with disappointment and veiled threats.
A grotesque
His mother called it
betrayal
a grotesque betrayal.
of everything we
His
are.
father spoke of legacy and bloodline like curses. But for the first time in his life, Sirius didn't have to listen. Because Hogwarts wasn't just a school, it was an escape. A castle vast enough to get lost in, ancient enough to hide things no adult could monitor, magical enough to feel like anything was possible. Its walls didn't whisper of duty or disgrace. They whispered of secrets, of laughter echoing down moving staircases, of friends waiting in corners you hadn't found yet. And Sirius was finally free to be who he was, not who he was meant to be. He and James became inseparable. Together they unraveled Hogwarts like a map made just for them. They snuck into the kitchens, befriended ghosts, invented secret codes and elaborate dares, and collected detentions like trophies. It didn't take long for their names to become a kind of legend. Brilliant, reckless, and always together. They weren't just students. They were marauders in the making. But Sirius and James weren't alone for long. there was also Peter Pettigrew, short, round-faced, and perpetually out of breath, as if the world moved just a little too fast for him. He was the sort of boy you'd forget in a lineup, the one whose hand went half raised in class and then slowly sank again. But for all his hesitations, Peter had something that mattered. He adored them. To him, Sirius and James weren't just classmates. They were icons, living, breathing proof that brilliance and bravery could be loud, funny, and wildly disobedient. Peter followed them like a shadow with bad posture. And while he wasn't particularly gifted with a wand, he was eager, loyal, and absolutely terrified of disappointing them. There was a sort of hunger in him, to belong, to matter. And the closer he stayed to James and Sirius, the more he felt like he did. Then there was Remus. Remus Lupin didn't seek the spotlight. In fact, he seemed to shrink from it. Quiet, bookish, always pale and a little tired, with eyes that looked older than they should.
Mr. Lupin?
He had the kind of presence you only noticed when the room went quiet.
Yes,
But Sirius noticed him.
Professor.
Everyone did, eventually. Not because he tried to stand out, quite the opposite, but because there was something behind his calm, a storm trying not to show. No one knew where he disappeared to every month.
Hiding something.
He always came back more tired, more withdrawn.
Indeed.
Excuses were made.
Sick relatives.
Sick relatives,
Colds and flus.
strange flus,
Migraines.
sudden migraines.
Not buying it.
But James and Sirius were many things, and Oblivious wasn't one of them.
A werewolf.
When they figured it out, when they realized what Remus was, Sirius thought he might be scared, but he wasn't, and neither were the others.
We'll talk to him.
Instead, they laughed, called him Moony, joked about fleas, and even scratched behind his ears, teasing him, the same way Sirius and James always teased each other. It was affection, real and unspoken, their way of saying, "We're friends, all right?" For Remus, it changed everything. The full moon wasn't a secret to hide anymore. It was a night like any other, spent with friends, planning pranks instead of hiding alone. He didn't come back to silence and fear. He came back to faces that understood, to a place where he belonged. And so the four of them, Sirius Black, James Potter, Peter Pettigrew, and Remus Lupin, became something more than classmates. They became a pact, a promise. They were the Marauders now.
Ah, there you are, my beloved viewers. Fear not, I'll be quicker than a golden snitch. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here for this episode of the Spellbook Chronicles. And if you think Quentin Pendragon is charming enough to deserve your generous support, you might consider leaving a like. And I highly recommend subscribing to the channel too, clicking the bell icon to make sure you don't miss a single episode. And why not, joining the channel to get priority access to every new video for just a couple of galleons. So, what are you waiting for?
Time passed quickly at Hogwarts, as it often does when the halls echo with laughter and secrets, and the nights leave little room for sleep. Before long, Sirius's younger brother, Regulus, arrived at school. He was sorted into Slytherin without hesitation, earning silent nods of approval from their parents. It was exactly as it should have been, at least in their eyes.
Brilliant.
Sirius, meanwhile, came home for the holidays with the defiance of someone who no longer cared to hide it. His bedroom wall was soon covered in posters of Muggle pin-ups and motorbikes, wedged between Quidditch flyers that no one in the family cared about. On the shelves, rows of toy vehicles, mostly motorbikes, sat beside magazines filled with engines, speed, and smoke. His parents said nothing, but the silence that followed was never empty. It was charged, cold, and growing heavier with every passing year. At school, the divide between the brothers deepened. Blood may have bound them, but little else did. Regulus moved in carefully curated circles, boys with crisp uniforms and colder smiles, who spoke in whispers about bloodlines and loyalty. Many of them would one day wear the Dark Mark.
Nice friends.
Sirius couldn't have chosen a path further from that.
Come on, mate.
With James at his side, his star only burned brighter.
We've got a match to win.
The two were inseparable,
Yes, mate.
unstoppable.
Let's do this.
Gryffindor's twin comets. The school's official records are vague on the matter, but it's widely believed that Sirius played beater for the Gryffindor Quidditch team, while James was their prized chaser. Ask anyone who was around back then, they'll tell you it was true. The girls loved them. The boys either tried to compete or just moaned about them from the sidelines. One of those who complained was Severus Snape, a Slytherin boy with greasy hair, pale skin, and eyes that looked sharp enough to cut. They had met on the Hogwarts Express their very first day and clashed before the sweets trolley had even arrived. From that moment, it was animosity with no breaks.
Only dark wizards.
Snape was sharp, no question,
End up in Slytherin.
and he nursed a grudge like a wounded animal. James, ever the showman, had dubbed him Snivellus, a name that clung to him like mildew and refused to wash off. Snape, in turn, made it his mission to track them down.
Insolent fool.
He lingered in the halls, always lurking, notebook in hand, ready to pounce on any slip-up. He wasn't bold enough to confront them face to face, but he never missed a chance to tip off Filch or hide behind a suit of armor to eavesdrop. He wasn't a real threat, more a persistent nuisance, unwanted, unrelenting, always there. As the years passed at Hogwarts and adolescence took its toll, lycanthropy became harder and harder for Remus to manage and to endure. To ensure his safety and that of his peers, the boy was taken to a shack each month during his transformations, locked away to prevent him from attacking other students. But that isolation slowly broke something in him. His howls of pain and rage echoed through the village of Hogsmeade, and the locals, unaware of the truth, began to believe the shack was haunted by violent ghosts.
There are ghosts.
Rather than deny it,
in the shack.
Dumbledore encouraged the rumors, and the Shrieking Shack gained its infamous reputation as the most haunted building in Britain. Back then, the Wolfsbane potion didn't exist. Every full moon was a battle Remus faced alone, a battle that left him more withdrawn, gaunt, and silent with each passing month.
Remus.
Watching this, Sirius couldn't take it anymore. Seeing his friend vanish into pain and shame, something lit inside him. A wild idea,
After all,
mad maybe,
why not?
but worth trying. What if, on full moon nights, he, James, and Peter could become animals too? Maybe then Remus wouldn't be alone. Maybe the beast inside him would feel less like a monster and more like a pack. Of course, it was almost impossible. Becoming an animagus was a magical feat so complex that most adult wizards wouldn't even attempt it. But Sirius didn't care.
This'll be fun.
He convinced James and Peter, and together they began studying the ritual in secret. They spent 3 years hiding ingredients, whispering incantations, waiting for the right storms. One mistake could have meant disaster, but they didn't stop. Sirius was the first. One night in 5th year, he transformed into a great black dog, fast, silent, and powerful. A few weeks later, James followed, becoming a stag. Peter, after much struggling, became a rat. From that night on, everything changed. Every full moon, the 3 of them would sneak out under James's invisibility cloak, slip past the Whomping Willow, and meet Remus in the Shrieking Shack. They couldn't stop the transformation, but they could ease the pain. The wolf was still there, wild and dangerous, but it wasn't alone anymore. And so, little by little, the boy behind the beast began to return. But they didn't stop there. Once they learned to move through the grounds unseen, they started exploring. Hogwarts by night, Hogsmeade by moonlight, the forest, the hills, even the castle's deepest secrets. They memorized every trick staircase, every vanishing step, every hidden tunnel. And from that mischief, an idea was born.
A map.
A map.
Not just any.
Not just any map,
Masterpiece.
a masterpiece. Magical, sarcastic, and impossibly precise. Built using the homunculus charm and infused with their jokes and each member's unique personality, it showed every corner of the school and every person within it.
Right corner.
An enchantment of staggering complexity, and in the right hands,
Got it.
a tool as powerful as it was ingenious. When it was finished, they signed it with pride. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. That was their name now.
Padfoot.
Padfoot, yes.
Yes.
To Sirius, no name had ever felt more like him.
It's perfect.
A declaration, a legacy, a joke, maybe, but one that outlived them all. No one knows exactly how it happened, but it's said that the map was later confiscated by good old Argus Filch. likely thanks to yet another tip-off from Snape, who had grown increasingly obsessed with getting James expelled. But none of that mattered to Sirius.
It's all right, mate.
Because in the end, the real magic wasn't the map, it was them.
We've got each other.
What they'd done, what they'd become,
We're a family now.
his real family. Their days at Hogwarts had come to an end, but the bond forged in those ancient corridors remained unbroken. Sirius Black still carried a flicker of hope in his eyes, though the shadows lengthened around him. The war, once spoken of only in hushed tones, had erupted into open chaos. What the Daily Prophet, decades later, would call the First Wizarding War was no longer a fear or a whisper. It was reality. Even Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, as well as the era's most revered wizard and the man who had once vanquished Gellert Grindelwald, seemed weighed down by the grim tide rising before them. The name Voldemort, still rarely uttered, cast a pall over even the boldest hearts. But Sirius wasn't afraid of the name. He hurled it like an insult, as if the very syllables were poison he refused to swallow.
Voldemort.
The Dark Lord, in a way, embodied everything his family had always believed in,
Mark my words.
everything he had fought against,
You'll pay.
all his life. Those who stood against pure blood supremacy and the persecution of Muggleborns were hunted without mercy.
Imagine that Voldemort's powerful now. You don't know who his supporters are. You don't know who's working for him and who isn't. You know he can control people so that they do terrible things without being able to stop themselves. You're scared for yourself and your family and your friends. Every week news comes of more deaths, more disappearances, more torturing. The Ministry of Magic's in disarray. They don't know what to do. They're trying to keep everything hidden from the Muggles, but meanwhile, Muggles are dying too. Terror everywhere, panic, confusion. That's how it used to be.
Voldemort's followers, the Death Eaters, wielded dark magic with chilling purpose. The unforgivable curses, outlawed for centuries, returned with brutal frequency, and his cousin Bellatrix at the forefront. Perhaps the Dark Lord's most loyal and lethal servant. Meanwhile, the Black family let rivers of gold galleons flow into Death Eater pockets, secretly funding the war. Sirius couldn't simply stand by and do nothing.
Can't wait any longer.
While his best friend James, who had changed in their final school years, becoming a more mature person and setting aside old grudges with Severus Snape, now a Death Eater, was enjoying a happy time alongside his partner, the brilliant Lily Evans. Sirius could already feel the distant echo of an oncoming storm. But then came the wedding, and for one day, even young Black, who stood proudly as best man, chose to set all that darkness aside. That day was for celebration. That day was for smiling. For that one day, life was beautiful. And then, at the wedding, alongside Remus, there was Peter Pettigrew. To Sirius, he had been like a brother. At Hogwarts, they had shielded him, lifted him, saved him from more scrapes than he could count. But Peter had always been the quiet one, the uncertain one, less gifted perhaps, more eager to please than to lead. Yet Sirius had begun to sense a change in him. In that atmosphere of war, Peter seemed to shrink beside James's courage, Remus's brilliance, Sirius's own prowess.
Nice, Pat.
Beyond the fear, it was as if he ached to matter, to be seen, to stand taller than his shadow. But perhaps, deep down, it had only been a feeling, a fleeting impression. It was an autumn day in 1977 when everything changed for James, Lily, Sirius, and the others. A message arrived. Sealed with utmost secrecy, Albus Dumbledore summoned them.
There is a group,
He said,
a secret society formed to resist Voldemort's growing threat, unrecognized by the Ministry, but believed in by many, the Order of the Phoenix.
For years, rumors had whispered of witches and wizards who dared stand against the Dark Lord and his Death Eaters. Now at last, the invitation was real. The Order had been founded quietly in 1970, when the war was still in its early tremors. Dumbledore, long aware of Tom Riddle's descent into something far more dangerous than Grindelwald, knew what was coming. Over time, trusted Aurors joined the cause, striking quietly from the shadows. Sirius, along with his closest friends, answered the call.
Let's do this.
They became part of something greater, something deadly. At last, Sirius knew he would be able to prove his worth. At last, he could make his contribution to change things.
This changes now.
But despite their skill and careful planning, the price they paid was devastating. The Bones family was almost entirely wiped out. Benji Fenwick, Marlene McKinnon, brilliant and brave, were murdered without mercy. Then came the turn of the Prewett brothers. And yet, the Order endured. Among them was Alastair Moody, the legendary Auror, feared and respected for his unyielding methods, having sent more Death Eaters to Azkaban than any other, though he struck only when necessary. Others followed, Frank and Alice Longbottom, former Hogwarts classmates, whose skill and courage earned them the particular hatred of Bellatrix Lestrange, his ruthless cousin. Sirius's veins boiled with rage. He always gave everything, always on the front lines, always at James and Lily's side, one skirmish after another, one ambush after the next. And yet, why did it always seem to be the innocent who paid the price? He sometimes wondered how his cousin Andromeda was doing, and his brother, Regulus. Who knew? Sirius would spend hours lost in thought, watching the world around him. And Peter, always there to reassure him,
okay, mate.
always with the right words at the right time.
Thanks, Wormy.
Peter was a good lad. But after so much darkness, after a long and weary summer, came the autumn of 1979. A light.
Big news.
Lily was expecting a child,
It's a boy.
Harry.
Harry.
Sirius could hardly contain his smile. The Marauders celebrated. Perhaps, after all, this was what it was all for. The war, the pain, the sacrifices. They were doing it for this, for those who would come after, for those who deserved a better world, for little Harry Potter.
Little Harry.
An unexpected piece of news, however, would change the course of everything. The Dark Lord had learned of a prophecy, a chilling foretelling that spoke of a child born in July, destined to bring about his downfall. That child was their son, or so he believed. The warning came from an unlikely source, a Death Eater, Severus Snape. Beneath his cold allegiance, something still flickered, a love for Lily Potter that had never truly died. Desperate to save her, he turned against his master. He went to Dumbledore, revealed what he knew, and pledged his loyalty to the Order of the Phoenix.
Rubbish.
Sirius, however, was never one to forgive easily.
Won't trust Snivellus.
James might have been willing to believe in Snape's remorse, but Sirius remained wary.
He's changed.
Could a man so steeped in darkness truly be trusted? Was this just another ploy? Still, Sirius trusted Dumbledore without question, and for the Potter's sake, he set his grudges aside. Marked and hunted, James and Lily had little choice.
Godric's Hollow.
They withdrew into the shadows of Godric's Hollow,
Is it safe?
a quiet village steeped in old magic and watchful allies. But hiding required more than distance. Dumbledore urged them to use the Fidelius Charm, a spell so powerful it could conceal their location within the soul of a single person, the Secret Keeper. Only that individual could reveal the truth, willingly or not. No spell, no curse, no amount of force could extract it. It was perfect protection. But perfection, as they would soon learn, is a fragile thing in the hands of men.
An immensely complex spell involving the magical concealment of a secret inside a single living soul. The information is hidden inside the chosen person, or secret keeper, and is henceforth impossible to find. Unless, of course, the secret keeper chooses to divulge it. As long as the secret keeper refused to speak, you know who could search the village where Lily and James were staying for years and never find them. Not even if he had his nose pressed against their sitting room window.
We trust you.
James and Lily had no doubts. Sirius would be their secret keeper.
Yes, mate.
Loyal, unshakable, their dearest friend.
No.
But Sirius thought differently.
Peter.
Determined to outwit Voldemort, he proposed a daring switch.
What?
They would name Peter Pettigrew instead.
It's the safer way.
Who would ever suspect Peter? Timid, unremarkable Peter, the last person anyone would look to. Sirius was the obvious choice. Always on the front lines, always at James's side. He'd be the first they'd try to break. And there were rumors, whispers of a spy within the Order.
Get ready.
No one could be fully trusted. Perhaps, Sirius thought, this was Peter's chance. The moment he'd long been waiting for. A chance to prove himself.
Wormy.
Everyone agreed. The charm was cast.
You're their secret keeper.
And so, the fate of the wizarding world
Guard them.
was sealed.
Don't fail.
That summer lingered, warm and golden. On the 31st of July, 1980, Harry Potter was born. Within the quiet sanctuary of Godric's Hollow, the Potters poured their hearts into those first precious months. Hidden from the world, they lived for their son, his first smile, his first laugh, his tiny hands gripping theirs. Love filled the rooms of that little cottage. Laughter echoed through its halls. So reads a letter written by Lily to Sirius during those days, later found by Harry many years after.
Dear Padfoot, thank you. Thank you for Harry's birthday present. It was his favourite by far. 1 year old and already zooming along on a toy broomstick. He looked so pleased with himself. I'm enclosing a picture so you can see. You know it only rises about 2 feet off the ground, but he nearly killed the cat and he smashed a horrible vase Petunia sent me for Christmas. No complaints there. Of course, James thought it was funny. Says he's going to be a great Quidditch player. But we've had to pack away all the ornaments and make sure we don't take our eyes off him when he gets going. We had a very quiet birthday tea, just us and old Bathilda, who has always been sweet to us, and who dotes on Harry.
We were so sorry you couldn't come, but the Order's got to come first, and Harry's not old enough to know it's his birthday anyway.
James is getting a bit frustrated shut up here. He tries not to show it, but I can tell. Also, Dumbledore's still got his invisibility cloak, so no chance of little excursions. If you could visit, it would cheer him up so much. Wormy was here last weekend. I thought he seemed down, but that was probably the news about the McKinnons. I cried all evening when I heard. Bathilda drops in most days. She's a fascinating old thing with the most amazing stories about Dumbledore. I'm not sure he'd be pleased if he knew. I don't know how much to believe, actually, because it seems incredible that Dumbledore could ever have been friends with Gellert Grindelwald. I think her mind's going, personally. Lots of love, Lily.
It was Halloween night, 1981, and it was meant to pass like any other. Dark, quiet, filled with uneasy thoughts, and the lingering warmth of a butterbeer or two shared with Peter. They had planned to meet that evening, he and Sirius.
Wormy.
But when the young black found his lodgings deserted,
Are you here?
no sign of a struggle.
Wormy.
Had Peter disappeared? Was something about to happen?
Peter.
Something terrible? Or perhaps it already had?
Something's wrong.
Within moments, his enchanted motorbike roared into the night, tearing through wind and darkness, towards Godric's Hollow, towards the home of his closest friends. What he found there would haunt him forever. In the silence, 2 bodies, still, silent, guarding the remains of a life that should have been untouched. It was there, before the heart-wrenching cries of little Harry, that Sirius understood. The secret had been betrayed. And apart from Lily and James, only he knew the truth. Peter Pettigrew was the spy.
The Potters.
He had betrayed them.
Tell them.
He had killed them.
Peter.
The weight of betrayal pressed hard on Sirius's chest. A wound that would never truly heal. Inexplicably, against all logic, the Dark Lord had fallen, defeated by the most innocent of creatures. But at what cost?
I'll take him.
As James and Lily's chosen godfather to the child, he offered at once to take Harry. But Dumbledore had already made arrangements. Rubeus Hagrid arrived in the early hours, solemn and unyielding, tasked with delivering the child to his only remaining family, Petunia Dursley.
The boy.
For him, it was the best option. He would keep Harry safe, protect him from all this, until he was ready to understand. Sirius said nothing. He simply handed over his flying motorbike, whispering that he would no longer need it.
Just take it, Hagrid.
But grief soon gave way to fury. Peter Pettigrew was still out there, somewhere, and Sirius meant to find him. He did, but too late. Pettigrew had anticipated it. Before Sirius's wand, he begged and pleaded, sobbing, until desperate, at the first chance, he acted swiftly. He caused a blast so powerful it tore through the street, killing 12 muggles. Screams, devastation. In the smoke and rubble, all that remained was a single severed finger. Peter had vanished, transfigured into the rat he truly was. And so the final act of the tragedy was complete. Sirius was seized that very night, branded a traitor, accused of murdering Peter and the Muggles, and of betraying the Potters. He was dragged away without trial, sentenced to Azkaban, remembered for years as the most devoted and dangerous servant the Dark Lord had ever had. In the midst of the North Sea, within the walls of the prison known as Azkaban, once the dwelling of Echristus, Sirius Black waited for time to pass. Sooner or later, he knew he would die, and that was fine. The Dark Lord had fallen. Most likely, little Harry, despite everything, would be safe, and his own life held little meaning anymore. The torment of losing his dearest friends gnawed at him from within, down to his very bones. But his thoughts were not only with them. No, there was another person who, deep inside, held a place in his heart.
Brother.
That fool, his brother, Regulus, dead. Nearly 2 years by then. No one truly knew what had happened. The official story was vague. Regulus Arcturus Black had died young, loyal to Voldemort until the very end. A footnote in a war that had already claimed too much. Forgotten. Dismissed. But Sirius wasn't so sure. Outside Hogwarts, the war worsened. Voldemort's grip tightened, and Regulus, like many purebloods, admired him.
He's right.
He spoke of bloodlines and order, convinced that wizard kind must be restored to greatness. Sirius had heard these words all his life, but in Regulus they sounded different. Less cruel, more certain, as if grasping for meaning in a world falling apart.
At last.
At 16, Regulus bore the Dark Mark, accepted by his family and sealed by their influence. He became a Death Eater, but the darkness was not what he imagined. Sent away alone on a mission he barely understood. Kreacher, the Black family house elf, perhaps Regulus's only true friend,
Kreacher.
returned, broken and terrified.
What is it?
The Dark Lord had used the elf to test the protections on a locket he guarded obsessively.
A locket.
What Regulus discovered in the days that followed remains uncertain. He told no one,
Magic.
but he had begun to piece together the truth.
The darkest kind.
The locket was not just precious, it was a Horcrux. A vessel, corrupted and unnatural, that contained a fragment of Voldemort's soul. So he made a choice. With Kreacher at his side, Regulus would return to the cave. He would retrieve the locket, destroy it, and in its place, he would leave a message.
To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death, in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. Regulus Arcturus Black.
But Regulus never returned. The cave was guarded by more than enchantments. Beneath its still waters stirred an army of Inferi, dead things bound by darkness and commanded to kill. To reach the locket, Regulus was forced to drink a potion that clouded the mind and racked the body. It poisoned thought, blurred time, dragged him towards madness. And still he endured. He gave Kreacher his final orders. Take the locket. Go home. Destroy it, if you can. Regulus stayed behind. At just 18 years old, he vanished beneath that black water, swallowed by the very darkness he had once pledged himself to. But Sirius never knew. He never saw the letter, never learned of the cave, the locket, or the sacrifice. All he had was silence. And in Azkaban, that silence was deafening. 12 years passed. Then, At sunrise on one of those endless, meaningless days behind those walls, something happened. Inside the shadowed cell, Sirius Black saw a photograph. It was printed in the Daily Prophet, the Weasley family on holiday in Egypt. But Sirius's eyes weren't on the smiling children or the towering pyramids. They fixed instead on a rat perched on the shoulder of the youngest boy. A rat he could recognize among 1,000. It was him, Peter Pettigrew, still alive, hiding in plain sight. After so long, Sirius may have found the strength he needed, a purpose to live for, a reason to escape. How he did it has long been debated, but most magical historians agree on one secret the Ministry never uncovered. Sirius Black was an unregistered animagus. In the form of a great black dog, his emotions dulled, his thoughts less human, less penetrable to the Dementors patrolling Azkaban's halls. Stripped of strength, but not of will, he slipped past the guards. He vanished into the sea. A ghost returned from the grave. The Ministry was thrown into panic. It was the first known escape in Azkaban's history, or at least, that's what they believed. But while the world reeled from Sirius Black's escape, shadows stirred elsewhere. This next chapter in the legacy of the noble and most ancient House of Black does not follow a wizard, but 3 witches. 3 women, bound by blood and marked by tragedy. The Black Sisters.
Andromeda, stop.
This story begins long ago, with the union of 2 noble wizarding houses, the Blacks and the Rosiers. Both were members of the so-called Sacred 28, the elite British families considered truly pure blood by the 1930s. It was in this context that Cygnus Black and Druella Rosier were joined in marriage, likely not for love. Both noble houses, in fact, were in dire need of strengthening their bloodlines and alliances like never before. Only a few years had passed since the end of the global wizarding war and the fall of the infamous dark wizard Gellert Grindelwald. And while this new era promised many things, for purebloods, none of them were particularly good. Tolerance toward muggles was beginning to spread faster than dragonpox, and with it came an ever-growing threat to the preservation of pure blood heritage and magic. Mixed marriages were becoming more common, and more muggle-born witches and wizards were stepping into the wizarding world, further eroding the old ways. Despite everything, both Cygnus and Druella entered their marriage willingly, fully aware of the duty they were fulfilling as heirs to such prestigious dynasties. And so, in 1951, their first daughter was born, Bellatrix. With her dark hair and piercing eyes, it was immediately clear that the child was the embodiment of the most distinctive traits of the Black family. Raised with care and affection by her parents, Bellatrix, who quickly revealed an exceptional sharpness and a natural talent for magic, was groomed to become an extraordinary witch, fiercely proud of her pure blood heritage. In contrast to her, Andromeda, just a few years younger, seemed cut from an entirely different cloth. In some ways, her features resembled Bellatrix's, but her brown hair and lighter eyes framed a gaze that conveyed serenity and a genuine enthusiasm for the smallest of things. Although her magical abilities proved to be every bit as impressive as her older sisters from the very start, Andromeda seemed hardly interested in them. More than once, her questions, asked with a mix of innocence and sharpness, would infuriate Bellatrix and their parents. Her curiosity often challenged the family's expectations, particularly their extreme pure blood ideology. Born in 1955, there was finally the third and youngest sister, Narcissa. Their mother adored her, often spending entire nights rocking the little one to sleep while softly singing an ancient lullaby passed down through generations in the Black family. Blonde hair, ice blue eyes, and skin as pale as snow. It took little more than a glance to see how Narcissa was, outwardly, the opposite of her older sister Bellatrix. Yet, in everything else, the two felt as alike and inseparable as could be. If Bella protected Sissy from trouble, Sissy helped Bella become sharper and less impulsive. Together, they never missed a chance to mock the ruined gatherings of Andromeda and her inseparable little cousin, Sirius, who was always eager to stir up trouble. Bellatrix had learned from her father that Aunt Walburga was extremely concerned about Sirius's fascination with Muggle vehicles, which the boy found incredibly captivating. It must be said, however, that Andromeda loved to stir the pot and feed such gossip to the family. Seeing their eyes widen at the mere mention of the word Muggle was an endlessly satisfying spectacle. Despite their differences, however, one thing remained undeniable. The three sisters shared a deep and unshakable bond of affection. The days passed, and with the arrival of the summer of 1962 came Bellatrix's official invitation to attend the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And so, Cygnus and Druella knew the time had come. On a warm August morning, the two parents gathered their three daughters to present them with an object they claimed to be of utmost importance. It was a box, crafted partly from goblin-wrought silver. Now that their eldest would be heading to Hogwarts, they said, this box would symbolize their sisterhood. Soon, all three of them would be witches in their own right, and more than ever, it would be crucial that their bond remained unbroken. The box was divided into 3 sections, so that each of them, during their future years at Hogwarts, could hide within it something that, to them, would represent the most treasured of memories. And if at any point in the future they wished to reopen the box, they would have to do so together. Each of them would need to seal one of the 3 locks with a specific charm, one that each would keep secret until the time came when they would decide together to unlock it. The sisters promised their parents that nothing and no one would ever come between them. They would remain united, always. The House of Black took great pride in claiming that, for generations, every member of their family had been chosen by the Sorting Hat to join Slytherin at Hogwarts. And after Bellatrix, who was sorted without hesitation, Andromeda followed a few years later. It is said, however, that the Hat was more uncertain with her, and it's likely that Slytherin was chosen at her insistence. Perhaps deep down, Andromeda didn't want to disappoint her family. Perhaps she didn't want to disappoint her elder sister. Or maybe she simply wanted to stay close to her, despite everything. As expected, Narcissa followed her 2 sisters into Slytherin, and for those first years at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, their bond only grew stronger, one fond memory after another. At the castle, each of the 3 sisters had the chance to hone their skills and nurture their talents. Bellatrix, in particular, quickly proved to be a brilliant duelist, thanks in part to the rigorous training in the dark arts her parents had subjected her to from a young age. It didn't take long for Bellatrix to claim the top spot in the school's dueling club. If Bella excelled in defense against the dark arts, Andromeda was perhaps the brightest charmed student of her year. In particular, she displayed unparalleled talent in healing magic. A more amusing anecdote tells of how she would use her mastery of spells to annoy her messier dorm mates, proving to be exceptionally skilled in cleanliness and household charms. According to her future daughter, Nymphadora, Andromeda was extraordinarily adept at the pack charm, effortlessly getting items to fit neatly into place, even coaxing socks to fold themselves. Narcissa, on the other hand, like Bellatrix, quickly showed her aptitude for the dark arts. Although she wasn't as exceptional a duelist as her sister, Bella soon noticed her natural talent for occlumency, the magic that shields one's mind from legilimency, preventing others from accessing or influencing thoughts and feelings. But Narcissa's heart did not beat for the dark arts like her sisters, for unexpectedly, a feeling she had never known before began to surprise her little by little. His name was Lucius and his charm and gentle manners had won the girl's heart. Moreover, not only was he a fellow Slytherin, but he was also one of the brightest students at Hogwarts, with a promising career ahead of him, and the heir to one of the most important families among the Sacred 28, the Malfoys. Surely her parents could have no objections. When Bellatrix and Andromeda learned of little Sissy's engagement, they could do nothing but be happy for her. But as we know, love, when it's real, is not a feeling one can command. It was an autumn day when Andromeda, engrossed in her studies, received an enchanted note.
Whose is this?
The girl was taken completely by surprise. It was a declaration of love.
Tonks?
Edward Tonks, known to everyone as
You
Ted,
can't be serious.
a Hufflepuff boy she had occasionally chatted with,
Hello there.
but whom she had never thought much of. Or maybe she was wrong.
For Merlin's sake.
Half in jest, half for fun, Andromeda agreed to go out with Ted, who surprised her with his enthusiasm and his outlook on the world.
Muggles are weird.
She had never really explored the perspective of a muggle-born wizard before.
You don't say.
He told her the most absurd things. Who could ever believe that the most popular sport among muggles wasn't Quidditch, but a ridiculous game called soccer?
They play soccer.
Andromeda couldn't stop laughing.
I swear.
Being with Ted reminded her so much of the days spent with her cousin Sirius. Being with him had shown her how much, in those last few years, she had conformed to become the Slytherin witch the Black family had raised her to be. In order not to break a bond, she had chosen to be the sister that Bella and Sissy wanted her to be. First with Sirius, now with Ted, Andromeda had remembered what it meant to be herself. It was in that moment that the girl realized it was time to fill the keepsake box her parents had given her.
It's time.
She was happy. Happier than she had been in a long time.
At last.
The letter Ted had sent her that day, declaring his love, as well as the flower he had given her on their first date, represented the most precious memory. Not just because it symbolized her love,
Colloportus.
but because it represented her true self. And so it was, after sealing her own item inside the box, that Andromeda realized she was the last of the three sisters to place her treasure within. What had Bellatrix and Narcissa sealed away? Perhaps one day she would find out. Perhaps. Andromeda had made her choice, and her sisters needed to know. If their bond was truly genuine, if it wasn't just a facade, they would understand.
Bella?
And so,
Sissy?
she told them the truth.
Ted and I, well.
She and Ted Tonks, a muggle-born,
I think I love
had fallen in love. If Narcissa's eyes revealed fear and uncertainty,
What?
Bellatrix's gaze showed nothing but pure hatred.
You're not my sister.
She spat, her voice dripping with contempt. But Andromeda stood strong, unyielding. As much as the pain shattered her heart, she was ready to face the consequences of her choice. Deep down, she had always known that her family would never understand, not even her sisters. When the news reached them that summer, Cygnus and Druella ordered their daughter to sever ties with that filthy mudblood who, in their eyes, not only tarnished their name, but would forever disgrace the proud, pure blood heritage of their house.
You don't get it.
But Andromeda didn't care. And so, shortly after the end of her 7th year at Hogwarts, when she announced her marriage to Edward Tonks, the inevitable happened. Andromeda Black was disinherited. Her name was burned off the family tapestry at number 12 Grimmauld Place and permanently erased from the family tree. For the Black family, Andromeda had never existed. Bellatrix and Narcissa never spoke to her again. Andromeda had betrayed them, just as she had betrayed everything they had been raised to uphold. Why dishonor their origins? Why disgrace their very magical nature by mingling their noble blood with something so filthy and unnatural? For the Blacks, pity could not be tolerated, and so their sisterhood came to an end. After their marriage in 1973, Andromeda and Ted had a daughter, Nymphadora, a name chosen by her mother.
Nymphadora.
The little girl,
I like it.
who would later be sorted into Hufflepuff, just like her father, would go down in history as one of the most promising and skilled Aurors. Her heroic deeds would become foundational during the rise of the Dark Lord in the Second Wizarding War. Narcissa, to her delight, married Lucius, with whom she was able to have a male heir, Draco.
Come.
Bellatrix eventually married Rodolphus Lestrange, a fellow wealthy pureblood and Slytherin, driven by the obligation to uphold her family's pro-pureblood mentality and traditions. Unlike her sisters, however, she never showed any love or affection toward her husband. She never spoke of him in conversation, nor did she bear him any children. When the First Wizarding War broke out, Bellatrix and her husband became Death Eaters, as did Lucius, fighting for the Dark Lord. To Bellatrix, he represented a new era, a chance to safeguard the purity of her family once and for all. It is unclear why, but unlike Bella and Lucius, Narcissa never officially became a Death Eater, perhaps preferring instead to focus on her family and the upbringing of little Draco. Demonstrating her loyalty and skill, the Dark Lord chose Bellatrix to be one of his closest servants, personally training her in the most powerful and secretive dark arts. Even after his defeat at the hands of the infant Harry Potter, Bellatrix remained more faithful to him than anyone else. After the fall of the Dark Lord, the witch felt every certainty and hope crumble. It couldn't end like this. It shouldn't. On October 31st, 1981, Bellatrix and a group of Voldemort's followers managed to avoid capture and execution. In their desperate bid to find and revive their master, the group kidnapped 2 Aurors and members of the Order of the Phoenix, Alice and Frank Longbottom, who had just become parents to Neville Longbottom. It was against them that Bellatrix unleashed every ounce of her despair and fury. With violence, the Cruciatus Curse was unleashed upon the couple, tortured to the brink of exhaustion. Bellatrix sought information about the whereabouts of the Dark Lord, information the Longbottoms could never have known. The pain, pushed beyond any limit, drove the couple to madness. Frank and Alice were placed in the Janus Thicky ward for irreversible spell damage at St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, and due to the extreme torture they endured, they were left unaware that they had a son together.
Dad?
This crime ignited a wave of fury across the wizarding community, so intense that the Ministry of Magic faced critical pressure to apprehend those responsible. When Bellatrix was captured, she was tried before the Council of Magical Law and sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban. Unlike many other Death Eaters, she did not deny her loyalty. Bellatrix proudly declared her unwavering allegiance to Voldemort and insisted she would wait for his return. Years went by, and in 1986, Andromeda returned to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry under unexpected circumstances. Her daughter, Nymphadora, was in her 3rd year, and the invitation to attend a grand ceremony celebrating the school's founding gave Andromeda an opportunity she had long awaited. She resolved to confront her past once and for all by reclaiming the keepsake box her parents had gifted to her and her sisters, which had been lost for many years. With the help of her daughter, Andromeda unraveled the secrets of the enchanted locks after recovering the box, which Bellatrix had meticulously hidden in the dueling club room. Andromeda opened the first lock, her own, by pointing the wand and focusing on her happiest memory. After countless attempts, and with the assistance of Albus Dumbledore, the witch finally uncovered the secret to unlocking her sister's locks. The soft strains of the Black Family lullaby opened Narcissa's one, while the elder sisters demanded a blood payment. When the box finally opened, Andromeda gazed upon the most cherished memories her sisters had hidden away. For Sissy, it was the Malfoy family brooch, a gift from Lucius during their courtship, symbolizing her worthiness to join his family.
Yes.
In the end, she too had chosen love. Bellatrix, however, had left no such trace of sentimentality. Whatever her treasure had been, she had ensured its destruction, leaving only a pile of ash behind. What memory were you trying to bury, Bella? Andromeda often found herself silently wondering over the years. Without a word, she gathered the ashes left behind, carefully placing them in a small vial, a token she would carry with her always.
Oh, Bella.
Deep in her heart, Andromeda knew the truth. Whatever her sister had sought to destroy, it had been something too profound to truly vanish. No matter their differences, their ideologies, or even the hatred that had come between them, Bellatrix, Andromeda, and Narcissa would always share an unbreakable bond. They were sisters, and nothing could ever change that.
And here we are at the end of this special episode. A family whose name still echoes today in the wizarding world. As a warning and as a lesson. It's not our name that defines who we are, but our actions. If you enjoy this special, stay tuned, my dear viewers, because with Quentin Pendragon, the stories never end. That is, unless the Minister of Magic fires me first. I am always your charming adventure wizard, and with that, I bid you farewell. Until the next tantalizing episode, always here on the Spellbook Chronicles.